Ebony Odogaron is the most unnecessary monster in the entire Iceborne roster. Another hot take coming right up. I don't like Ebony Odogaron. Drop the ball on a subspecies to Odogaron. But it's a shame how they took one of my favorite monsters and gave him such a boring and uninteresting subspecies. He is exactly what every other subspecies should be. You, yes you, take notes. You'll be tested on this at the end of the video. You'll be tested on this at the end of the video. You'll be tested on this at the end of the video. Well, this was unexpected. So Monster Hunter Wilds has finally been released. Over 2 months ago. Yeah, I've been radio silent for a while given the fact that a new Monster Hunter game is released. But rest assured, I am still working on the Wilds ranking, and I will give you guys an update on that at the end of the video. But anyways, let's actually talk about Wilds. Over 120 hours in, and I think it is an absolutely amazing game. I do have some problems I could get into, some it shares with World and others unique to the game, but it is still phenomenal nonetheless. As for the ranking, it's honestly been really fun to make, mainly because of how fantastic this game's overall roster is. But there was a certain group of monsters that stuck out like a sore thumb. The Guardians. This new subcategory of monster frustrates me more than any other boss here, because there is so much potential these guys have that is tragically wasted. In base game Wilds, there are 6 main Guardians: Zoshia, Guardian Arkfeld, Doshaguma, Rathalos, Fulgur Anjanath, and Ebony Odogaron. For this video, I will not be focusing on Zoshia or G Arkfeld, as Zoshia is pretty much his own thing, while Guardian Arkfeld feels like a continuation of regular Arkfeld, rather than his own creature. Especially with G Arkfeld being the low rank version, while regular is just the high rank version. I may not even include the other 4 in my official ranking, as there's so little to talk about individually that it's almost pointless. One of my biggest problems with the Guardians is that they change so little from the original version that they feel redundant, and what they do change feels incredibly half-baked, especially compared to past reskins like subspecies and variants. It's really a shame because the Guardians could be awesome given their concept and lore, but the execution left a lot to be desired. Many aspects of this game have already been picked apart and debated by the community, but I rarely see anyone talk about these guys. So let's discuss the Guardian monsters. Are they the biggest example of missed potential in Monster Hunter Wilds? Let's jump right in. Story has never exactly been Monster Hunter's strong suit, and the focus on it in Wilds has definitely divided the community. Some find it to be a welcome addition that makes low rank much more enjoyable than past games, while others find it to be a nonsensical waste of time with annoying side characters that distract you from the action. There are problems I have with the campaign, but in terms of the story itself, it's serviceable enough. The plot is about as bare bones as it can get, but Capcom did try to add some quote-unquote twists in the story, the main one being the Guardians. Now for those who don't know, the Guardians are essentially artificial monsters created by the people of Wyveria, and used as literal weapons to defend their civilization. So much so that their ability to eat and reproduce was entirely removed, instead being sustained by the energy source known as Wilk or Wyvern Milk. Why the hell did they call it Wyvern Milk? But the Wyverians pushed it too far. When they attempted to create their own dragon as a weapon of war, they combined different parts of elders together to form a weapon to rival dragons. An equal dragon weapon, if you would. Surprise, surprise, it went terribly wrong as the creature rebelled against its creators and left Wyveria as nothing but dilapidated ruins. These milk-powered monsters are definitely a source of controversy, with some people going as far as to say it ruins the world building, ditching fantastical ecology for the sake of sci-fi slop. Personally, I think people are fabricating how excessive this is. To put this into perspective, we've seen a golden praying mantis create a highly advanced kaiju-sized robot out of a pile of scraps. We've seen portals that allow beings from different dimensions to appear in this world. We've seen a tiger that zips through the air using the recoil of its farts from the energy of consumed animals. And don't even get me started on the sapient floating dragons that can telepathically speak fluently to 2 human girls. With all that being said, should we really draw the line at GMOs powered by milk? While this change in direction may be excessively sci-fi for some people, I really don't see this as the most outlandish thing to appear in the series. The setback comes from the struggle that sci-fi media has compared to fantasy. In fantasy, you can have a mythical dragon float in the air without much explanation. But because sci-fi involves things made by humans and technology, it creates a lot more disbelief. It's very different to discuss guardians compared to any other monster because they are not animals. They are constructs resembling the shape of an animal, literal weapons birthed and modified to attack and defend a civilization. So this is where the disbelief comes to a peak. If these are simply artificial constructs made to resemble and fight like a certain creature, how do they resemble the original monsters to a near identical level? You're telling me that just some genome tampering and milk was enough to create a near perfect copy of Doshaguma, with just some bleach poured on its fur and some purple veins? Sure, their esophagi and reproductive organs are removed, but we can't see that. You're seriously gonna have me believe that there wouldn't be any morphological differences? The design approach to the Guardians just feels lazy in my opinion. All they did was change the monster's color scheme to white and purple. They still look good, but more could have been done to convey them as artificial. Now you may say, well, subspecies only changed their color scheme and nothing else is done with their design. Why do you like that with them and not here? Well, the difference is the changes in their design felt purposeful because they are meant to better blend into their environment. And by literal definition, subspecies are genetically different while still falling under the same phylogenetic group. They are two sides of the same coin, only changed in their coloration to adapt to their different environment. The Guardians do not work here because they are not organic animals. Even Jurassic Park did this aspect better. Say what you will about where that franchise went, but when it came to its genetically modified creatures, they established very clearly that the dinosaurs made were imperfect, ones where genetic tampering led to clear morphological differences from the original species, making them very different in structure and anatomy compared to those found in the prehistoric era. Until apparently they weren't anymore, but let's not worry about that. This is where the missed potential comes in, because I would have loved to see Capcom take a different approach to this group, depicting them as weapons instead of animals, and visually displaying that in their designs. For example, what if the Guardians had exaggerated body parts that make them much more efficient at killing? Give Doshaguma a larger maw, give Odogaron and Rathalos longer claws. It would make logical sense for the Wyverians to build these monsters as weapons instead of exact copies, and allows the Guardians to be far more special than a glorified reskin. To be clear, I do not want hybrid monsters like Indominus Rex. There better not be anything like, I want an Anjanath head with a Diablos body and a Glavenus tail. Like, no, get out of here with that crap. Stuff like Yangaruga works, but that would definitely not. I did say I wasn't going to talk about him, but I would have loved a similar approach to what they did for Zoshia. This amalgamation of milk and different monster parts made into a single deformed creature. It still has a familiar skeleton and some moves near identical to past monsters, but its unique design and mechanics make it entirely different from what's been done before. There's a sense of familiarity to past creatures while still taking advantage of this idea of a construct monster. Now obviously they're gonna put more effort into the final boss than some monster variations, but I at least would have preferred a little bit of creativity compared to none at all, especially considering how essential these guys are to an entire locale. Hell, they could have even taken a similar approach to what they did with Xenith monsters back in Monster Hunter Frontier. For those who don't know, Xeniths were basically monster variations that had an excessively grown body part, like Xenith Espinas with the massive sword-like horn, Xenith Hypnocrates with the oversized hornbill beak, Xenith Kezu with the, These Xeniths had very intense fights and felt like brutal upgrades due to their new abilities, which were mainly centered around that exaggerated body part. I'm not asking for them to copy Xeniths, but something akin to that idea would have been really impressive to see. Overall, the design approach to the Guardians felt very lazy. Their genetic origin has so much untapped potential to be used, but the final result being a bunch of glorified reskins is a massive disappointment. But that's too nitpicky, Brybashton. Complaining about the designs and nothing else, these Guardians are still so much better than the original monsters. And from what I've said, you'd assume so. So if they're exactly the same as the original but harder, that must mean that their fights should be better, right? Right? So a lot of people don't give a damn about monster design or ecology, they just want a boss they can beat into a pulp and possibly give them a fun challenge. So let's talk about actually hunting these guys. Now, the Guardians aren't objectively bad fights or even dysfunctional like the frenzied monsters, but similar to what I said in the last chapter, a lot of new additions feel lazy or half-baked in execution. In terms of their physical movesets, not much has changed. They're given some combo extensions and a handful of faster attacks, but they're not given new moves or abilities like variations found in the 5th generation. The main difference is that they can augment their attacks with Wilk energy, which is telegraphed by a white glow and distinct sound, creating these AoEs that deal high amounts of damage. What's interesting is that if these AoEs occur in an area with Wilk on the ground, Wilk crystals are formed. These crystal formations appear to do nothing at first, but when any elemental attack makes contact with them, said crystal will explode to deal damage of that inflicted element, and possibly chain with other crystals that'll explode simultaneously. A neat mechanic is that both you and the monster can use this to your advantage. Elemental pods from your slinger allow you to blow up the crystal, or vice versa through the monster's elemental attacks. I actually like this as a gimmick, and it creates an added danger to all monsters having an element, but there are some issues in execution that I'll get to in a minute. There's also the wound and knockdown systems. Basically, Guardians are immune to exhaustion, can passively regenerate wounds inflicted over time, and cannot eat or drink to recover. Instead, they absorb Wilk from the ground to enter their charged up state, where they can unleash both Wilk and elemental attacks. However, using focus attacks and destroying enough wounds will discharge the monster for a special knockdown, leaving it in a fatigued state where they are unable to use Wilk or even their big elemental attacks. Then, the Guardian can re-enter its empowered mode by absorbing more Wilk. So these fundamental mechanics are all sounding good on paper. You have a hyper mode that rewards aggression and a new wound system to knock them back into a fatigued state, along with Wilk crystals that encourage the use of your slinger. Then what's the problem here? Well, the problem is that you only get to experience these mechanics for about a third of the fight. Because of how easy it is to inflict wounds in base wilds, you end up flinching the monsters out of their hyper modes before they can even give you a challenge. What drives this even further is how they treated the fatigue state of the Guardians. During these phases, the Guardians are lacking in their elemental attacks, combo extensions, and even their aggression. So for a good chunk of the hunt, Ebony can't use his dragon attacks, Fulgur can't use his thunder attacks, and all the Guardians become so easy to beat to a pulp. The Wilk crystals and explosions are also good ideas, but you don't get to use them because the Guardians are too busy being fatigued to create them, and when they do, it can often feel too easy to turn the Wilk crystals against them. It feels like most of the Guardians will just leave them sitting for minutes on end without ever activating them. They seem to accidentally proc the crystals rather than take advantage of the hunter's positioning. Another thing, even though the wounds are supposed to heal over time, focus attacks are so easy to take advantage of that there's never a sense of pressure to actually close the wounds. Now keep in mind, for a third of this fight, these Guardians deliver on being somewhat difficult upgrades to their originals, but the other 2/3 of this fight are arguably easier than the original versions. So the difficulty of these apparent upgrades is sadly left half-baked. Then there's something that upsets me in particular, the lack of ecology and personality in the Guardians. People don't seem to realize it, but the Guardians are missing many small aspects or details that don't seem substantial at first, but take away so much flavor found in their base counterparts. For example, Guardian Doshaguma is missing his pack mechanic along with his gimmicks of throwing small animals or having all his wounds open up. Ebony is missing that little meat he carries around like a lost puppy, or how he drags animal corpses to his nest. These details may seem pretty inconsequential, but those additions to the ecology and fight are what make the monsters feel so alive and compelling. Now, it's expected that some of these details are missing because they are not animals, but I wouldn't be complaining if it weren't for the fact that some Guardians replace the original. With Dosha and Rathalos, the original versions are still intact, but with Fulgur and Ebony, their only appearances in the game are lacking a lot of the charm and personality found in World. There are some new mechanics added to certain Guardians, like Dosha's new spit attack that inflicts defense down, but once again, they don't utilize these enough for them to be meaningfully distinct. The spit attack does not make G Dosha feel special compared to regular Dosha. I don't inherently hate the Guardians or dislike hunting them, but they are simply underdeveloped in execution. They should be exciting upgrades of older monsters, but if they fail at that, what does that leave us with? Nothing. I may sound too harsh here, but Capcom has shown that monster variations can use the same template while still feeling like an entirely different boss, in subspecies. For example, there's Puke Puke. a forest-dwelling bird wyvern that sticks out its frog-like tongue to consume flora that he can output as poisonous gas. Afterwards, Coral Puke Puke was made, who instead lives in the Coral Highlands, so his color scheme has been changed to match the vibrance of that ecosystem. Instead of getting poison from the forest botany, Coral drinks up water from blue fungi sprouts to utilize the water element. Instead of spewing out purple gas from his mouth and tail that requires smart positioning, Coral Puke fires pressurized beams that demand precise dodge timing. Even Silver Rathalos and Gold Rathian are better executions of this, as they don't change a lot aside from a different coat of paint and new fight mechanics, but the execution leads them to not only be way more challenging, but also distinct from regular Rathian and Rathalos. My point is that instead of simply being a recolor with endgame stats and random AoEs, Capcom set the bar high by creating unique variations that feel like entirely new monsters, many of whom I find to be better or more interesting than their base counterpart. Meanwhile, all the Guardians feel like the same damn creature. Even if they were more frustrating or annoying than the originals, at least I'd feel something towards them rather than nothing at all. But I guess that's not entirely true because I do have differing opinions on every Guardian. So you know what? Let's do a mini ranking of all the Guardians, from the worst to the best. And I'm trying to delay this as much as possible so I don't have to talk about Ebony Odogaron. Ebony Odogaron is back in MonsterHunterWilds, much to my dismay. Those familiar with my content know that I was not a fan of Ebony in Iceborne, and spoiler alert, I'm not a fan of him in this game either. Having stayed blind to the Wilds leaks, it was certainly a surprise to see him back. Surprised? If I woke up tomorrow with my head sewn to the carpet, I wouldn't be more surprised than I am right now. To make a disclaimer, Guardian Ebony, like regular Ebony in Iceborne, is just fine. It's not an objectively bad boss, and anyone is valid to love Ebony in either game. First onto the positives, because they did fix some of Ebony's issues in Iceborne. He's no longer an idiotic invader that just appears on every map, the ecology of being Dyke Devil Joe is gone, the Elmer's glue on his body makes for a much better aesthetic, and they gave him one unique turf war where he actually uses Dragon Element, so thank God for that. Regular Odogaron is also not in Wilds, nor Stygian Zinogre or any monsters that invalidate his existence, so he's not nearly as pointless in this game as he was in Iceborne.
This is empty. Yeet!
However, Guardian Ebony frustrates me even more than the normal because of how damn lazy he is for a supposed new-gen entry. This is supposed to be his jump from the 5th to 6th generation, and Ebony has no changes unique to itself that the other Guardians don't already have. There are no new attacks or mechanics exclusive to G-Odo, and overall Odogaron feels defanged, even compared to his Crimson cousin in High Rank World. He lacks the relentless energy and intense pressure that Clifford previously had in spades, and overall feels much more sluggish and easy to abuse. You could argue that the crystal spawns are placed strategically to combine with Ebony's combos, but as mentioned, it's not implemented in the boss AI as well as it could have. He's even missing certain aspects of Iceborne's version, like who decided to remove the fake out attack that he had. What's worse is that Ebony already lacked dragon attacks in Iceborne, so why didn't they implement more here, especially if using elemental damage to create crystal AoEs was the entire focus of the battle. Also, he's undeniably the easiest of the 4 Guardians. He suffers the worst from being able to knock out a hyper mode, and is so much of a punching bag during the fatigued state that it's honestly comical. He can't even use the dragon attacks like the spit during this mode, so he's lacking in dragon abilities even more so than Ebony did in World. And so many parts of Guardian feel like he's gone backwards from the original. Normal Odogaron is one of my favorite monsters of all time, and it's such a shame to see a cult classic who was one of the biggest skill checks in World be turned into a lazy, forgettable punching bag that gets overshadowed by a cooler Apex immediately after killing him. You may see my opinion as overkill, and you're valid if you like him, but this monster just offends me with how inoffensive he is. The lack of base Odogaron is especially noticeable. Even if there's no biome that fits his niche, it feels wrong having the Guardian version without the original, especially with this version lacking the scavenger personality, the iconic turf wars, and even the challenging fight that tore new players like myself apart. I get why Ebony is a Guardian from a pragmatic and lore standpoint, Alma literally explains it to us like Dora the Explorer, but I just want the animal that I love rather than a mindless hound dog with no personality or even an exciting battle.
We better watch out for Swiper the fox. Swiper's always trying to swipe our stuff. If you see the fox, yell Swiper. What did you say? You see Swiper? Where? Behind the tree?
Monster Hunter has proven that their boss variations can be a source of creativity and excitement. Bosses that expand on what the original established and sometimes usurp said original in quality. But Ebony falls flat in comparison, and I really hope that guardians like him are not the direction that Capcom takes. The only reason you love Guardian Ebony is because of what the original already did. Variation is part of a monster's identity, and G. Ebony does not differentiate himself enough to be unique, and nearly all the changes he has make the monster worse in comparison. So is Guardian Ebony Odogaron the most unnecessary monster in Monster Hunter Wilds? No. However, he frustrates me even more so than Iceborne Ebony, because Capcom had the chance to change Odo for a new entry, to create a worthwhile variation that is distinct and maybe even better than the original. But for me, he still remains a forgettable monster and a truly disappointing successor to Odogaron. Now we move on to the milk-chugging polar bear. Jokes aside, Doshaguma is a decent guardian and better than G. Ebony by a mile. He works as a good introduction to the guardians and is the only one who has no element, meaning he can't activate the will crystals the same way that the others can. I get what they're going for with this, having the first guardian not utilize the crystals so that you can learn without risk of the monster beating you to it, but in execution, this dosha feels lacking without that gimmick. On top of that, being able to use all the crystals to your advantage makes this boss a joke, and dosha doesn't get any complex mechanics to fill that void. Emphasis on complex, because they did give G Dosha these spit attacks that will inflict you with defense down. Now that's something I really like and would have enjoyed seeing on base Dosha. However, it's so underutilized because he rarely does that attack, and you get hit by it even less. I'm not joking, somebody had to tell me that the spit attacks inflict defense down, because I never got hit by it and thought it was just a visual effect. He does have the Wilk explosions and some combo extensions, but G Doshaguma definitely feels lacking, especially since a lot of his bread and butter is completely gone. Whether it be his pack mechanic, not reopening his closed wounds, or being able to chuck small monsters at you, Doshaguma just feels empty here in my opinion. There are some good qualities that put him above Ebony. It's cool how he walks bipedally a lot more to make him look more intimidating. I like the bleached fur aesthetic, and the Wilk explosions provide a pretty good rhythm to the battle as a whole. I still think the original Doshaguma is better, but then again, I don't believe any of the Guardians are better than their originals, so that's not just his problem. This one frustrates me in a different way than Ebony or Fulgur, because I am down for Doshaguma as a Guardian. Not only because it's his first game, but the original left a lot of potential for an endgame variation. Unfortunately, he's missing a lot of special aspects that the original had, while failing to execute the new gimmicks he's been given to fill that hole. Despite ranking it lower than Fulgur, I would rather have Guardian Dosha over him or Ebony, because he at least feels distinct from regular Doshaguma, but the execution leads to him missing most things that made the original such a unique monster.
Stand clear, please. Stand clear, everyone. Contact!
I share a lot of problems with Guardian Fulgur that I had with Odo in terms of its very existence. Compared to Ebony, Fulgur in Wilds isn't nearly as gutted and actually provides a decent fight, even if I think he's considerably easier than base Anjanath in World. He's the best looking of the Elmer's glue bunch, I appreciate that they kept the sneeze attacks with this sinus issue, and the lightning attacks are way more effective at setting off the will crystals. There are some aspects lacking in the new Fulgur that I don't like. The worst offender being how he's missing that awesome transformation roar when the sails pop out. Why did they cut that out? It's such a shame. They also changed the Foxy Lunge, turning it into a basic attack rather than the big super move that killed off many new players, which removes a lot of the tension I had with base Fulgur. He does stand out way more in this game due to being the only big brute wyvern, as well as the lack of his cousins or even other brutes like Bomburo. But in general, this is definitely the Guardian I have the least to say about, because he doesn't have anything unique to himself, and none of what he does is considerably good or bad. It's the same thing with Ebony. You like Guardian because he's Fulgur Anjanath, not because of anything new he brings to the table. Practically nothing was changed from the older version, and it still confuses me why there are no other Anjanaths in this game. Unlike Odogaron, base Anjanath could have easily been implemented into the Scarlet Forest, but Capcom's just afraid to put in 5th gen monsters that aren't Guardians. This is a good time to discuss my issues with the roster as a whole, and why I think it puts way more pressure on Ebony and Fulgur in particular. So Capcom is releasing a new Monster Hunter game that is aiming to be bigger than World ever reached, and only 2 monsters introduced in 5th gen are coming into this new game. So how do you evolve these monsters from a pretty recent game and make them feel fresh for both new and old players? Well, that's the neat part. They don't. They don't even try to add anything new for these two. I believe people, myself included, would not nearly be as harsh towards Fulgur or Ebony as Guardians if there were more returning monsters. The lack of any bosses that even appeared in 5th gen like Diablos, Tigrex, or Deviljho is strange, and leads to one of this game's biggest complaints being the small roster. The thing is, the roster is basically on par with base World. The reason it feels smaller is because of how much bigger the locales in World are, leading the environments to feel more empty than they actually are. Because of this, bringing back 2 subspecies as the only returning monsters from recent games, and barely changing anything about them here makes the return stick out so much more, and not for the right reasons. So yeah, even though G Fulgur is objectively better than G Doshaguma, it's not because of anything special that this Fulgur does. I just like base Fulgur way more than base Doshaguma. Guardian Fulgur Anjanath is essentially a less offensive and butchered version of Guardian Ebony. He's still lazy and lackluster as a monster variation, but he utilizes these new mechanics better, and Fulgur is just a damn fun monster on his own. Guardian Rathalos is the best one, and it's not even close. Unfortunately, he's also noticeably worse than base Wrath in this game. But you know what? That is awesome, because I at least feel different about a Guardian compared to its original. And if all the Guardians were treated the same way as Rathalos, I wouldn't nearly be as critical of them as a group. Compared to base Wrath, who is much more aerial and reliant on fireballs, G-Wrath is a lot more grounded and focused on claw attacks. The Wilk explosions are integrated in a much more natural way, as most attacks from the talons will cause Wilk AoEs. Then Rathalos will use his Fire Breath to create elemental explosions. He definitely suffers the least from the issues I talked about with the Guardians. His AI feels programmed to actively explode the Wilk crystals, and his combos are built with the Wilk explosions in mind. And get this, G Rathalos actually has moves entirely unique to himself. It's astonishing, isn't it? Like, he has this move where he slides across the floor to cause an explosion, and then turns around to immediately blow up the crystal with a fireball. There's also this new super move where he zips high into the sky and comes crashing down to create a massive Wilk explosion, which gives you time to fire an elemental pod at all the crystals around him. That's the kind of satisfying additions I want in these monsters. Now, the fight isn't perfect. Putting aside the issues I've mentioned about Guardians, he can spend way too much time in the air, his animations can be janky, and he very much gets overshadowed by base Rathalos, even more so than Doshaguma. However, this is still the best Guardian by a country mile, and the only one that's meaningfully distinct from the original. As mentioned, I appreciate variations that are different, even if they're considerably worse than the original, and G-Wrath is the only one to truly achieve this. Rathalos as a Guardian also makes sense. He's the poster boy and has been adapted many different times, and I think his role in the story is well done here. If Guardian monsters are treated the same way Rathalos is here, I'm content receiving more of them in the future. I would still have the complaints mentioned earlier, but G-Wrath shows that this group can live up to its potential. If Capcom chooses not to improve the Guardians the way I've discussed in the video, I certainly hope they take a similar approach to how they've handled Rathalos. Before I end things off, I should give my take on one of the monsters I see most requested to be a Guardian, and it's the Flying Hedgehog. It's basically an obligation for me to answer this question. Should Nergigante return as a Guardian in Monster Hunter Wilds? Hell no. Immaturity aside, I want Nergigante to return in Wilds, but as an animal. I don't want him back as a mindless artificial replica of the spiky boy. And Nergigante as a Guardian is literally an oxymoron to everything that makes him special. Nergigante is the Eater of Elders, nature's equalizer that brings balance to the ecosystem whenever the natural order is out of hand. It would be such a disservice to see Nergi be turned into a mindless milk sucker that lacks all personality he originally had. The awesome color scheme I love so much would likely be butchered, the incredible ecology with its thorns and hunting elders would no longer exist. And let's just think about the logic, shall we? Let's just think about it for a second. Why bring back the Eater of Elders as a creature that can't eat in a game where there are no Elder Dragons? Even when you consider the mechanics of the Guardians, Nergigante still wouldn't work. Remember when I mentioned that Doshaguma didn't have an element so he couldn't interact with the crystals? Well, Nergi would suffer the same problem. You need elemental attacks to make the will crystals explode, so Nergi would lack one of the biggest gimmicks of the Guardians, and would be incredibly easy to tear apart when you abuse the crystal explosions. So from a design, fight, and ecology standpoint, Nergigante would not work as a Guardian, and I will riot if they bring him back as one. To sum it all up, this group has me a bit worried about the future of Wilds. The fanbase has given them nothing but love and adoration, because it allows any old monster to make a return, even if it doesn't make sense given their ecology and biology. The Guardians have potential to be a really interesting subcategory, artificial monsters that are so different from their organic originals that they feel fresh and new, but Capcom seems to only be using them as a copy-paste template. Even if I'm harsh to some, there is so much effort and passion that goes into every monster in this franchise, creating their design, ecology, and biology to make them feel like a living, breathing animal in its environment. That is why I love these games, but with the Guardians, a lot of that is just abandoned for the sake of creating mindless monsters waiting on the map for you to kill. I'm okay with this if the originals come back as well, but based on Ebony and Fulgur, it seems like some Guardians will just completely replace the original. People keep on asking for returners like this. I want Guardian Rajang, Guardian Kurapeko, Guardian Namiel. If I want Guardians back, I want them to be unique variations that change the original. Evolutions that embrace the fact that they're artificial weapons. Don't just use them as a crutch to shove back in old monsters without any of their personality or ecology. And I really hope they stop making Guardians that are just copy-pasted from 5th gen. I'm not making this video as some rant about Wilds or saying that the Guardians are gonna ruin Monster Hunter forever. I simply consider them missed potential and think they could have been done so much better. I really hope that Capcom uses the Guardians as a source to express their creativity, as they've shown through past subcategories. Based on the upcoming title updates and how essential Guardians are to the ruins of Wyveria, it's clear that these guys are here to stay for future Wilds content. I trust that Ryozo and Capcom will make the right decisions with Wilds. And I hope the Guardians, like many aspects about the base game, are truly realized and live up to their full potential in the near future. Thank you all for your time. This was originally supposed to be part of my Wilds ranking where I complain about Guardian Ebony, but it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I decided that this would be a good appetizer to the main 2-hour course. I haven't been uploading for the past month, so I'll give you guys an update on my Wilds ranking and when to expect it. Progress has been going well so far. I have collected all the footage I need, and I am now officially done with the script, which is 78 pages in case you're wondering. I'm over halfway done with recording all the audio too, and nearly an hour of my ranking has been finalized and ready to go. Life has been keeping me busy for the past month, so I'm not going to set an exact ETA, but expect my ranking to come out at some point before Title Update 2. I know that's not the smartest deadline to set since we don't even have an official date at the time of posting this, but trust me, I'll make sure it happens. Until then, be sure to like and subscribe. This is Brybashton Benedicts, and lead thy life as thou seest fit.